Hello everyone, this is my second update for my multimedia montage project. It looks a little bit different from my original page, which I had added to my class blog as a separate page, but I realized that that format was going to be much more difficult to use than creating a separate site. So I decided to use Wix, and I created a site where I could have a little bit easier navigation since I have multiple tabs at the top, and I can also break down each heading into a group of subheadings to break down my information into pages a little bit easier, so it's a little easier to work with. So I decided that I would create pages for each of the primary components. So on my home page, I have access to each of the pages and a little description of what you'll find on each one. If we go to Educational Technology Tools, I have started to include some different tools that I'm using in the unit and just brief descriptions of these tools and how I'm going to be using them. And I provided links to each of the resources, which open in a separate page so that the navigation isn't interrupted and someone who's using my page as a resource doesn't have to be constantly going back after they've explored a new resource. So I'm going to be adding a few more tools to here as I go through. I'm going to skip unit plan right now because that one's a little bit more involved and jump to assessment tools. Under assessment tools, I started to describe some of the different assessment tools that I'm using throughout my project. I'm creating links both directly to the site where you can see an overview of the topic as well as here are some Plickers cards. And I guess I forgot to add a link to an example of a Plickers quiz that I created, but I'll be adding that shortly after the screencast. Next I included Padlet. I have a link to the homepage, and then I created a Padlet to explain how we can use Padlet as a resource and different things that you can post and why I believe it's a great assessment tool and different things that you can do with it, such as take an informal poll, which I'm going to be doing in my unit, using it as an exit ticket, sharing different resources with students, and having students anonymously ask questions. So those are a few different things. So I thought that was a nice way to use the tool to explain why it's a useful tool to use. Here is Kahoot, and I attached a quiz that I created for one of my lessons, Features of Fiction. Just sign back in, so I'll go through that later. My next tab is data tracking. I have included some different resources that you can use to help with data tracking, and I again created links that open externally for both the main resource used or digital tool used, as well as an example of how I'm using it in my unit for a few different pieces, and then I'll be going back and adding more as I create more data tracking pieces for my unit. Next, I'm going to go to unit plan. My unit plan I decided to break it up according to objectives. So since my unit has 9 primary objectives, and then each of those objectives has a couple of lessons or a few lessons depending on the objective. Some have more lessons than others as they're more involved, but I decided to break it up by lesson within the objective. So each of these images will jump right to one of my objective pages where you can see the lesson broken down a little bit more concretely. So here I'm going to be sharing resources for my overall unit, including the quizzes and assessments and the lesson plans and any other digital resources that I'm using, such as a Kahoot quiz or a Plickers assessment or anything like that. and I included the length of the unit and how it's arranged prior to the breakdown over here, where I listed each objective so that it's easy to see the whole picture of the unit prior to going through each individual piece. So I'm going to jump to objective 1. On each objective page is structured pretty much the same way. You have which number objective it is, what the objective is, and then the daily breakdown. So day 1, a brief description. I kept it to 1 to 2 sentences for each of them so that it's easy for teachers to grab which lessons are relevant to them. And then I added a link to the document, so when I click this, it will open each lesson. That one's not finished yet, but I will be going back and finishing that one out. Some of them are done, some of them need a little bit more embellishments and a little bit more description within the plans. And then day 1 doesn't have any special digital resources that I'm using, as it's primarily an introduction to the unit and practice with reading. So for the second day, I have a second option. I have a second piece over here, which also includes links to some resources that I'm using, which is, in this case, is Starfall, as we're introducing Starfall. So that brings me directly to the website, and I'll be adding some more as well. And the lesson plan is over here. If I jump over here to Objective 2, you can see that it's the same basic setup. The heading is the name of the objective. We have the objective written out. Each day is broken, has a brief description, and then is broken into the lesson plan and resources. And each of these either jump to a document or an external link. And you can see how I'm adding each piece, but I'm trying to keep the formatting consistent across the page. So please let me know if you have any questions. I tried to use resources that are either free or have very minimal costs, and if there are any costs associated with any of the resources that I'm using, I've included that. I had originally been using some resources that not all schools may have access to, so I tried to adapt some of those, such as in place of using Smart Notebook, if there are some teachers who wanted to use these resources that don't have access to a smartboard, I used Google Slides, which you can present in basically any kind of a setting where if you have a computer or a presentation type of software, it's much easier to access for a wider range of people. So please let me know what you think. I tried to take your comments into consideration, so I hope I'm heading in the right direction.